And I'm sure that when he was imprisoned in the mid-50s, many people probably thought at the time, the project is gone. The Jama'ah is finished. It'll never be on its feet again. But then we saw them come out, and we saw their struggle inside the prison give the enthusiasm and the courage to another generation, my generation for instance, because when I joined the Jama'ah, I was nearly 20 years old, and that was the time when the Ikhwan were being released from prison. And it's the idea that remains. And the idea never dies. All these projects, whether it is in the form of a certain reform movement, in the form of a certain revivalist movement, these are merely vehicles to carry the idea from one generation to another and to struggle until somehow fruits are born. And when I see some of the frustrated young men and women nowadays, and there are lots of them nowadays in the Arab world, and quite a few in Egypt itself, I try to bring in the story of some of the people who perished before us, and some of the stories that the Quran narrates to us, including the story of the people who were burned alive during the reign of the king in Yemen, who dug a ditch, and whoever refused to submit to him was burned alive. And the question that comes to mind here, would you consider that a failure of a project or a success? That is to say, if you adhere to the truth, if you refuse to give in or give up, if you refuse to surrender, and then you get killed for it, is that really a failure? I mean, people who think this is a failure, they have to do something about their knowledge, about their understanding, and even about their iman. Because how many of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ perished and never had the opportunity to see the success that was achieved by latter generations? I wanted to start with these remarks because I'm truly upset to see people come to conclusions so quickly, so rapidly, and make a final fatal judgment about the Ikhwan or about what's going on in the Arab region. Now, having said this, I must also say that despite what happened in Egypt, and despite the crackdown that resulted in the martyrdom of thousands, despite the fact that there are many more thousands imprisoned today, the Jama'ah is doing well. It's doing well by virtue of the fact that it is still causing headache for so many tyrants around the world. When the Saudi royal family or the UAE royal family in Abu Dhabi insist upon someone like Prime Minister Cameron to do something about the various institutions that exist in Britain that are considered to be associated somehow with the Muslim Brotherhood, or else they would call off lucrative arms deals with Britain, and then the Prime Minister panics and orders a review that shows that what happened in Egypt hasn't really given the signs or shown the signs that this project is finished or is over. The best way to see it is that this is part of a process, and the process of revival goes through stages. And there was a moment when we thought we're almost there. President Morsi is elected, We have a government in Egypt that is determined to work for the best interests of the population, that in the war on Gaza stood by the people of Gaza rather than conspire against them, as is happening at the moment. We really thought that this was the ultimate result that we've been all waiting for decades. But things now we learn don't happen in this way. And those of you who heard me speak before heard me refer to the French Revolution, which nearly took 100 years, a struggle between those who rose against the corrupt, defunct monarchy and those who were engaged in counter-revolution after counter-revolution in order to prevent the loss of the VIP status they managed to acquire at the expense of the populations. And it seems that there is a dynamic for this, a dynamic that is inevitable. No matter what we do, it will have to happen. We saw this in Latin America too, in the case of Chile in 1973, and later on in many other Latin American countries. Because the change is not just about being in power, called a prime minister or called a president. The change is about carrying the people with you in the project that you are working. And definitely now we know, now we understand that the Egyptian people are not ready. That the Egyptian people could easily be fooled by a media that is paid for by the Saudis and the Emiratis. They could easily be fooled by the Coptic Church, who sent its followers to the streets on the 30th of June, and who, in collaboration with the remnants of the Mubarak regime, convinced the world that they had 30 to 40 million people on the streets of Cairo and other places in Egypt. When you have a country that has a rate of illiteracy that is no less than 40%, that means it is still a long way to go. How do you carry the people with you? How do you prepare the people for the change that you want to bring about? And remember, of course, that Al-Ikhwan did not start any of these revolutions. These revolutions that we refer to as the Arab Spring started simultaneously. There was so much anger, so much frustration, that the people simply exploded in the face of the tyrants. And then as a political actor, whether you are an individual or you are a community or a jama'ah, you try to make use of the changing circumstances to the best of your ability. We knew and we discovered early on that Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, despite all the wars waged against them over the years, were still very popular, and they were still elected to parliament. One of their members was elected to the president's office, but it would seem that this was not sufficient at all, because you cannot rule a country in which you have no control over any of its main institutions: the police, the army, the intelligence services, the judiciary, and then you have the businesses against you, businesses, mainly those who were enriched by the previous corrupt regime, and also you have the media against you, a media that is also closely associated with the previous regime. There is evidence today also that despite the fact that there is a streak of desperation and frustration among certain people, and probably some of you have heard stories here and there, especially from young men and women who felt this was the end and left Egypt and left probably other places because they thought there was no use in pursuing the struggle. Despite all of this, the youth in Egypt are still taking to the streets every day, are still in university campuses, even offering their lives for this cause. Males and females, students are actively engaged or engaging the authorities, from the authorities at the campus level to the authorities at the level of the ruling army junta and the security agencies associated with them. We see today that this regime, which for the time being ended the transition to democracy in Egypt, is destroying the economy, is destroying the social fabric of Egypt, especially in areas where there is a lot of discontent, like in Sinai, like in the Upper Egypt, in the Said, and in some other rural areas. We can see a repeat, nearly a repeat, of what military dictators did to the countries of Latin America over many years, as well as, of course, in other places. Now, what is important to remember here is that this process that was started in Tunisia toward the end of 2010 is far from over. And when people sit down comfortably in their houses in front of a TV set, or reading a newspaper or reading a book, and issue final verdicts about the project, they need to make more effort in order to find out exactly what went wrong and what is going on at the moment. The story is far from over, and we can see this evidently by the signs of turmoil that is all over the place. Why do we have turmoil in Yemen? Why do we have turmoil in Libya? Why do we have a precarious situation in Tunisia? Simply because this Arab Spring that started in 2010 promises radical change, and this radical change is a threat to so many quarters, is a threat to so many circles. In other words, the struggle is continuing, and the struggle will go on. Definitely there will be the price paid for this struggle in one place like Syria may end up being much higher than the price of the struggle in some other places like Morocco or like Tunisia. But what they all have in common is that the struggle is going on. Now, what happens even if, in a worst case scenario, what happens if the Ikhwan in Egypt are completely finished off? So what? This is not about the Ikhwan or about the Salafis or about a certain organization here or there. This is about Muslims and Islam. This is about the long-term project to restore Islamic life to our societies. And throughout the history of Islam, there were other projects. Some succeeded, some were replaced by others. But the struggle goes on. Although I'm saying this to you, I don't see any signs of the Ikhwan disappearing from the scene, because they're quite established. I don't see that any of the measures adopted by the military junta in Egypt is killing the enthusiasm or is extinguishing the fire that is raging in the hearts and in the minds of the young generation. But I'm saying it in order to remind you that it is not the vehicle that we consider to be sacred, or that we consider to be, or hope that it will be eternal and permanent. A vehicle is a vehicle. It's a project, it's a tool. You start a project somewhere, if it doesn't work, you can start another project. What we need to do is to continue to engage in the struggle using whatever formats, whatever vehicles, until Islam and Islamic life is restored in Egypt, in Tunisia, in Libya, in Yemen, all over the place. And of course, all of this is very much linked to Palestine, because had it not been for the fact that there is an occupation in Palestine that is considered to be so vital for the Western powers, and is in direct alliance today with the despotic regimes in the Arab world, probably the process of change would have been a lot easier. Probably you've read articles or you've seen reports during the recent war on Gaza that a new alliance emerged just before the war started. And had it not been for that alliance, the war would not have been started at all. An alliance that brought together Israel, the Sisi regime in Egypt, Saudi regime in Riyadh, and the Abu Dhabi authority in the UAE. Of course, there is collaboration from other sectors with varying degrees, sometimes discreetly, sometimes more explicitly. The Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and Jordan as well. All of these thought that the time was best, that the time was right, in order to finish off Hamas in Gaza, since the Brotherhood in Egypt are severely wounded. That today Hamas would be on its own, no one standing by it, and it's very easy to devour it. This was the philosophy. Actually, we were told earlier, much earlier, that as soon as the coup happened in Egypt, Egyptian military rulers sent messages to the Israelis saying to them, if you want to destroy Hamas, this is the best time. No one will stand by it. Go ahead and do it. But the Israelis had their own calculations, had their own reckoning. Because the Israelis, they're part of the Western mindset, and they are pragmatic people, and they have to make sure that any step they take is well studied, etc. They have a Knesset to go back to. They have a semi-democratic arrangement, etc. They have allies in the West. They have also to take into consideration. So they did not heed the advice of the military rulers in Egypt until Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates moved in strongly and said, this is the time to finish off Hamas. They see Hamas as part of this global Ikhwani organization, and it is causing us a headache. We cannot be sure about the future so long as it is in charge of Gaza. So you see, our struggle in Palestine, the struggle of the people of the region for liberty, for dignity, are all linked. The struggle of the deprived people for a better living standard, for a better economy, is also linked to all of this. We're talking about a regional concern, a united regional struggle that is even taking global dimensions simply because of the involvement of so many other powers, not only regional but also global. So for someone to reduce all of this to the coup in Egypt and to the fact that the leaders of the Ikhwan are today in prison, leading him or her to conclude that the project is over and we have probably to live with the reality and accept the status quo, that would be an utter misjudgment, and one has to reconsider and rethink again. The Brotherhood, Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimun, a movement that started in Egypt in 1928, is no longer just a few individuals or a structure that exists in one place. It's an idea. So, of course, as an idea, it is not, of course, the sacred idea that I was referring to earlier, but it is an idea in the sense that it inspires millions of people around the world. Not only because of its thinking, which is moderate, which is mainstream, which is wasati, as we say in Arabic, and I don't mean moderate in the American sense of moderate or the Western sense of moderate or the governmental sense of moderate in the Muslim world, but I mean moderate in the sense, in the Quranic discourse that teaches us that you adopt the correct position that is in accordance with the proper interpretation of the Quran and of the Hadith, as well as of the events of history. Such an inspiring movement that has manifestations around the world, from North America to South Africa, from Latin America all the way to probably Japan. Such a movement is no longer just a structure you destroy using a machine gun or a tank or even an aircraft. It is something much deeper, more deep-rooted than anything else, and that qualifies it to revive as soon as circumstances improve. And I gave you the example of what happened to my generation when I was in high school, when we thought that the Ikhwan were completely finished, when in families like my own family, Jamal Abdel Nasser, who persecuted the Ikhwan and who killed them and who hanged their leaders and who caused the defeat of the Arabs in 1967 and the loss of the rest of Palestine, was glorified in many houses in the Arab world as the pan-Arab leader who was bringing salvation. You can see how fooled the people were, how deluded they were. How do you change this? You cannot change it unless you are patient and you struggle and pay for it. So when my generation saw the defeat of 1967 and then started reading about what happened in Egypt, and as soon as the Ikhwan in the early 70s started being released from prison, and we started meeting them in various places around the world, especially in my case when I was a young student in the UK and some of them visited us in the UK, it was so inspiring that within years the movement that was behind bars for more than 20 years became a global movement again, even more global than before. And that's why some of the people who wrote, some of the people who lived that experience have written articles reminding not just Sisi but reminding the public that if you think that the Ikhwan are over, you must be deluding yourself, because the same scenario happened in the 50s and the 60s. Then they came back again, and even when they were in prison, they inspired so many young men and women outside the walls of prison cells, to the extent that when the Ikhwan leadership was released, they already actually found Islamic groups across the universities of Egypt. And many of the founders of these groups were young men who never met anybody from the Ikhwan, but immediately afterwards joined the Ikhwan and became prominent figures within the movement. Now, another aspect of what we see nowadays is that the Ikhwan today, despite the fact that they are in prison, are the true defenders of liberty and democracy across the Arab region. They are actually the ones who are carrying the banner for the emancipation of the peoples of the region. All those who existed before, all those who claimed to lead movements of emancipation, nationalists, secularists, whatever they call them, liberals, most of them, not all to be fair, but most of them have sided with those who have destroyed or sought to destroy the dream of the Arabs and the Muslims. They sided by the military junta. They justified the coup, and then they justified the killing in Rabia, and today they justify the persecution of the people out of envy, out of hatred for what under normal circumstances would just be political rivals. And with political rivals, the best way to deal is to compete through the ballot box rather than through the bullet box. But they chose the bullet over the ballot, and that leaves the Muslim Brotherhood as the main defender of freedom, human rights, and democratization in the region, not only in Egypt but throughout the region. When President Morsi was elected, I, among others, said that this is the day projects like Al-Qaeda and its affiliates come to an end. Because if you can bring about change peacefully and without creating havoc in your own communities, that would be the preferable route for the majority of the people, because the majority of the people would prefer non-violent means of change. However, and by the way, even some leading members of Al-Qaeda themselves were worried that the success of the Brotherhood in Egypt was going to bring their own projects to an end. The conspiracy by the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the remnants of the Mubarak regime, and also the consent that such conspiracy received from the Americans and some of their Western allies, actually revived Al-Qaeda. Not only revived Al-Qaeda, it led to the emergence of even a much worse form of Al-Qaeda, ISIS or ISIL or Daesh as it is called in Arabic. A movement that is very much similar to a group that existed very early in the history of Islam called Al-Azariqa, a faction of the Kharijites, of the Khawarij. But understandably, it is a movement that is not created by a certain authority as some people think. There's no conspiracy theory here. But it is a movement that came as a direct reaction. Definitely some people exploited it. Some people felt they could use it, they could manipulate it, but the recruits into this movement, the recruits into this phenomenon happen to be frustrated, desperate young men and women who feel that all the doors for peaceful change have been shut in their faces. And now what remains is the ISIS promise of emancipation through the means they have been using. Of course, my own judgment of ISIS is that this is like a tornado. It's like the whirlwind, the storm that along its path destroys everything until it dies itself. Eventually, it will die because it doesn't have the ability and the inherent properties for survival. Yet, at the moment, everybody is concerned about ISIS. And nobody is asking themselves, where did it come from? It came after the coup in Egypt. That's where it came from. When you destroy a peaceful path of change, one that promises a mechanism to resolve people's differences peacefully. Of course, we are different. People are different. People have different mindsets. Within one own family, children think differently. But eventually, you need a mechanism to settle these differences. And you have one of two choices. Either you kill whoever disagrees with you, and this is ISIS or Daesh, or you adopt a democratic procedure by means of which you have a dialogue, you have a discussion, and then you let the people decide which way they want to go. And actually, it's not the ballot box that is the most important stage in this process, but it is the discussion, the dialogue, the interaction, the conversations that precede going to the ballot box. That's why a successful democracy is not just about going on the day of election. A successful democracy is about all the mechanisms that are involved throughout the period that precedes going to the ballot box, that brings people together, that creates some sort of a common ground of mutual understanding, and that was killed by the coup perpetrators in Egypt and by those who funded them. Now this development, the repercussion of what happened in Egypt, makes the role of the Muslim Brotherhood more important and more vital, and the need for them to come back more important and more vital, because there is no alternative. By the way, there is always a threat. There is always a danger when we have a crisis like this, that some people will start saying, our way doesn't work, we have to try another way. And I know, I converse with some younger members of the Brotherhood, especially in Egypt, and sometimes even outside Egypt, who say probably we are wrong. Probably democracy is not the way forward. Probably opening up to others who have refused to work with us is not the way forward. So what's the way forward? Is it Syria, where we have an entire country utterly destroyed? That's not the way forward. It cannot be the way forward. Is it Yemen, where we have a civil war at the moment raging in various places? Is it Libya, where we have the East fighting the West, and the Egyptians and the Saudis and the Emiratis funding a former Gaddafi loyalist in order to bring Libya back to the days of tyranny. And there is fighting and killing every day there. The best way is to be patient and to work harder for the creation of better awareness among the masses, because eventually we need to tell the masses they are going to pay for this. They are going to pay for the crimes perpetrated by Sisi and those who are with Sisi and those who support him and fund him. And we see this clearly. People complain of ever more power cuts in Egypt on a daily basis. They complain that Egypt, which once was an oil producer and a gas exporter, is now preparing to import gas from Israel with very humiliating conditions. You end up with a situation where Sinai is a war zone, where an entire town, Rafah, is being razed to the ground, alleging that it was part of the problem that the Egyptian authorities had in Sinai. And actually the reason they have a problem in Sinai is that they despise the people of Sinai so much that they don't even treat them as citizens. They don't treat them as human beings. And I spoke to many people in Sinai when I used to go and visit Gaza during the years that preceded the coup. The people of Sinai, some of them, and I regret to say this, they tell you that when they were under Israeli occupation from 1967 until about 1979, they were in a much better situation than at any time afterwards. When people now talk about Israelis not doing to the Palestinians what the Egyptian regime is doing to the Egyptians, that really that hurts me a lot. I didn't want anyone to be uglier than the Israelis. But unfortunately now we have Arab rulers. We have Arab rulers who are a lot uglier, who are more Zionists than the Zionists who took Palestine from us in 1948. This is the reality. And we need to create awareness in the minds of the public, so that rather than frustration and desperation, we need to revive the enthusiasm and the willingness to sacrifice. Rather than tell their sons and daughters, don't participate in the demonstrations, you're likely to be killed. Don't go to university today because there is this and that. Don't go out because there is a curfew. We want people to tell their children, if you don't go out and help your brothers and sisters bring about, establish justice and restore what is right in this country, we will all suffer. Yes, we will all suffer, and we will become the new Israelites that are enslaved by the new Pharaoh in Egypt. And this is the role of the Brotherhood. When the Brotherhood, when the Ikhwan insist that peacefulness is our strongest weapon, and some people make fun of this. Some people joke about this. They say, oh, the Ikhwan have nothing to do or say, but stick to peacefulness. I'd say this is the wisest policy ever that you can arrive at. Stick to peacefulness. Avoid violence. Continue to employ the means of civil disobedience in order to awaken the population. The population needs to be awakened. And we see signs of this awakening happening today, not only in Egypt, but also elsewhere in the region. So this wasati, mainstream, moderate position adopted by the Muslim Brotherhood is what will eventually save the day, what will eventually even save our future and save our dreams. Now, where do we go from here? It's very clear. It's very clear that this is only just a cycle. It's one round of many rounds in this struggle. And we have to be prepared for long-term struggle with our knowledge, with our money, with whatever resources that we can dedicate to this project, because those who want to prevent the transition from taking place are so resourceful and so determined, because they know that it's their necks It's their necks that they are trying to preserve. Their necks are on the line. And of course, they wouldn't want to lose the prestigious positions they created for themselves with the help of despotic, corrupt regimes. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us is part of His sunnah. At-tadafu', the interplay, the interaction, is continuous. There will always be people who will defend the truth, and there will always be people who will defend falsehood. And there will be in a struggle until the day of judgment. So where do you want to be? I'd rather be on the right, on the side of those who defend truth, and on the side of the oppressed, rather than be on the side of the oppressors, no matter how long or how much it takes. And by the way, in judging a certain experience anywhere, don't ever be tempted to drown yourself in the very localized details. Try to see the bigger picture. Because any event anywhere of this magnitude involves so many actors across the world, so many actors everywhere. And you need to see what the dynamic from all its sides. And it's a big dynamic. We lose a little bit here, we gain a little bit there. And that has to be taken into consideration. What happened in Egypt, although it is supported today by Western governments, it is actually making many people in the West, at the ordinary level, at the folks level, question the sincerity and the honesty of their own governments. So you see, we're talking here about global ramifications. We're talking here about an event in Egypt, in Rabi'a al-Adawiyya, and the images that came out of Rabi'a al-Adawiyya that are having an impact on someone who is sitting in Washington DC or in London or in Paris or elsewhere in the world. This is what's happening. This cycle of struggle, which involves a lot of sacrifice, might not only change Egypt, but it might also change the entire world. And probably you heard recently how in London, the parliament voted for recognizing the Palestinian state. Although it is not a binding vote, it wasn't a binding vote, and the government was not going to do anything about it. And it wasn't really important that they wanted to recognize the Palestinian state, because that's not the issue. But the issue was the speeches that were given in parliament on that day. I sat on in front of my TV set for 3 hours, listening to speeches never heard before in parliament, reflecting an important and a radical change in political opinion, which in itself reflects a change in public opinion. When some of the people who were known for their entire life to be friends of Israel were standing in parliament to condemn Israel and warn it that its very existence now is in question because of what it has done to Gaza. Now this is very important, because as I told you earlier, what happens in a certain locality is very much linked to so much that is happening elsewhere in the world. And it is no wonder today that the Jewish community in the UK is mobilizing against the leader of the Labour Party. Because the leader of the Labour Party, who happens to be Jewish by the way, Ed Miliband, agreed with his members of parliament from the Labour Party that in parliament, that on that day of discussion about Palestine, they'd come to parliament and they'd vote for the motion recognizing the state of Palestine. And now they want to punish him. They're withholding funding from the Labour Party in order to show politicians in Britain that they are still the ones who are calling the shots, and they are the ones who are holding the strings. But I think that's a very significant change in the political scene in Britain, and we see similar to it elsewhere in the region. And that is not to be, it is not to be dissociated from what happened in Egypt, because people around the world saw what happened in Egypt. And although not many of them, that is, those who are in power, speak about it, they know within themselves that the coup in Egypt against democracy was a big mistake, and it was bound to backfire and lead to disaster after disaster. Now, in conclusion, first of all, the struggle has a price, and someone has to pay the price. And we need a generation of people who are willing to pay the price, following in the footsteps of the prophets and the companions. Second, that what happened to us happened to those before us, and it will happen to those who will come after us, and it's not the end of the show. It's still a process going on. Third, the Muslim Brotherhood, with what it represents of mainstream ideas, of a wasati trend, is the only salvation that the Ummah has nowadays. And for this reason, it will remain there, and it will revive, regroup, and inshallah re-establish itself. It's not even gone. It is still there, and inshallah it will be back. Now I want to also conclude by a final point that is to do with judging Morsi and the government that he formed. Don't listen to anyone who tells you what happened because there were mistakes or errors. I'm not saying this because I think they were saints or they were infallible, but I'm saying this because if you want to make an assessment, a proper appraisal of what happened, you need to have the details. And all the people I have heard talk about this have no idea what went on. Morsi is behind bars. Khairat al-Shatir is behind bars. Many of their ministers are behind bars. Many of the leading members of the Ikhwan across Egypt are behind bars or underground or in the diaspora. And therefore, no one has been able to provide us with a proper assessment of what went on. Apart from the facts, we know for sure that this was a plot hatched in an Arab capital, in which the Saudis, the Emiratis, and the remnants of the regime, of the Mubarak regime, came together with tacit approval from the United States of America and Israel in order to end the process of democratization before democracy is well established. What we need to focus on is to talk about the injustices that are committed, that have been committed and that continue to be committed, and give people hope that on the basis of what we know from history and what we know from the Quran, that there is a lot of hope, and inshallah soon we will see the Ummah coming back, and it is coming back. Thank you very much.